I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who sits in a dimly lit kitchen at midnight, staring at a stack of bills while my son sleeps upstairs. But here I am, Ethan Carter, 44 years old, IT consultant by day and amateur life juggler by night. My apartment in suburban Chicago is modest, sure, but it's home. It's where my son, Liam, dreams of building robots that can change the world, as he likes to say. He's 10 now, with big glasses and an even bigger imagination. Sometimes, late at night like this, I wonder if I'm doing enough for him. Then there's Becky, Rebecca Carter, my ex-wife. She was once the glue holding our little family together. Or so I thought. 2 years ago, she walked out on us, citing irreconcilable differences. To be honest, I wasn't entirely surprised. Becky had always been impulsive, a free spirit, some might call her. Back when we were married, she'd blow through paychecks faster than I could deposit them, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Still, despite everything, we managed to co-parent Liam without too much drama. Until recently, that is, Liam is my pride and joy. If you met him, you'd see why. The kid's got this quiet determination about him, like nothing can stop him from achieving his goals. His dream? MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Every time he says it, I feel a mix of awe and panic because, let's face it, sending a kid to MIT doesn't come cheap. That's why Becky and I started a college savings fund for him years ago. We both chipped in whenever we could, me more consistently than her, admittedly, but it was something we agreed on. Liam's future mattered most. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. Becky's financial habits hadn't changed much since our marriage. There were those times when she'd buy expensive gifts or make extravagant plans, only to disappear for days afterward. At the time, I chalked it up to stress or loneliness. Divorce does funny things to people, I told myself. But now, sitting here in my quiet kitchen, I can't help but wonder if I missed something bigger, something darker. Things seemed fine, at least on the surface. Becky had re-entered our lives a few months ago, claiming she wanted to reconnect with Liam. She called regularly, visited on weekends, and even promised to contribute more to his college fund. I hesitated at first, wary of her intentions, but ultimately decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, Liam adored her. Who was I to stand in the way of their relationship? But lately, something felt off. Becky's visits became sporadic, her excuses vague. Last week, she texted me asking for access to Liam's college savings account. She said she wanted to transfer money directly into it. Her contribution, she claimed. I double-checked with the bank afterward, just to be safe. Everything looked normal then, or so I thought. It started with a phone call from a bank. They flagged unusual activity on Liam's college savings account, a large withdrawal that didn't match any scheduled transactions. My stomach dropped as I listened to the representative explain what happened. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. Becky, it had to be her. Why else would anyone touch that account? I called her immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. Panic set in as I drove to her apartment, rehearsing angry words in my head. When I arrived, her landlord informed me she hadn't been home in days. Her car was gone, her mailbox overflowing. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to consider the unthinkable. Becky had taken the money and disappeared. The next few days passed in a blur of disbelief and frustration. I contacted everyone I could think of, Becky's friends, co-workers, even distant relatives. But no one had heard from her. Each unanswered question only deepened the pit of dread in my stomach. How could she do this? To Liam? To me? To herself? Meanwhile, I struggled to keep the truth from Liam. He noticed my mood swings, the late-night pacing, the hushed phone calls. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, he asked point-blank, "Dad, is something wrong?" I forced a smile and lied, telling him everything was fine. But kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Later that night, I caught him staring out the window, lost in thought. Guilt gnawed at me. How long could I keep lying to him? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Sitting Liam down in the living room, I braced myself for the hardest conversation of my life. "Son," I began, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. There's something I need to tell you. And then I laid it all out. The missing money, Becky's disappearance, the betrayal. To my surprise, Liam didn't cry or lash out. Instead, he nodded solemnly, as if he'd already suspected something. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I think I know something." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning closer. Without a word, Liam ran upstairs and returned moments later, clutching an envelope. "Mom gave this to me before she left," he whispered. Inside were cryptic notes and receipts, all pointing to Las Vegas. That night, I pored over the contents of the envelope, piecing together clues. The receipts were dated within the past week, confirming Becky's whereabouts. Vegas. Of course. It made sense in a twisted sort of way. Gambling had always been her vice, though she swore she quit after our divorce. Clearly, that promise meant nothing now. As anger bubbled inside me, Liam watched silently from the doorway. "Are you mad at me?" he asked softly. My heart broke hearing those words. "No, buddy," I replied, pulling him close. "I'm not mad at you. This isn't your fault. It's hers." But even as I said it, I knew we couldn't just sit back and wait for answers. Whatever Becky had gotten herself into, we needed to find her, not just for Liam's sake, but for ours. The envelope Liam handed me was more than just a collection of receipts and notes. It felt like a lifeline. Each scrap of paper told part of the story, leading me straight to Las Vegas. One receipt stood out, a casino hotel reservation under Becky's name. Another showed a large cash withdrawal from an ATM near the Strip, whatever she was running from or toward. It wasn't good. I couldn't shake the image of Becky sitting at a blackjack table, her hands trembling as she pushed chips into the center. Was this about money, or was there something else driving her? I tried to focus on the facts, but my emotions kept getting in the way. Betrayal burned hot in my chest, but underneath it all, there was still that lingering ache of love for the woman I once knew, for the mother of my child. "We're going to figure this out," I told Liam firmly. He nodded, his small face set with determination. Before heading to Vegas, I decided to dig deeper into Becky's recent activities. I reached out to mutual friends, hoping someone might have seen or heard from her. Most hadn't, but one name kept coming up, Greg. Apparently, Becky had been spending time with him, a guy none of us really knew. When I pressed for details, people described Greg as charming yet shady, the kind of person who could sell you sand in the desert. A quick search online revealed that Greg had ties to gambling circles, and even a few criminal charges tucked away in public records. Bingo! It didn't take long for me to connect the dots. Becky hadn't acted alone. This Greg character must have played some role in convincing her to steal the money. The realization hit me hard. Becky wasn't just reckless. She'd been manipulated. Still, sympathy wouldn't bring our savings back. I booked a flight to Vegas, determined to confront both of them. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Thankfully, Maggie Thompson, our neighbor and unofficial second mom to Liam, agreed to watch over him while I was gone. As I hugged Liam goodbye, he whispered, "Bring Mom home, okay?" His words tore at my heart, but I nodded anyway. "I'll do my best," I promised. Vegas hit me like a punch to the gut. Bright lights, deafening noise, and crowds everywhere. I checked into a cheap motel off the Strip, using Becky's last known address as my starting point. The hotel staff confirmed she'd stayed there briefly, but vanished without checking out. No forwarding address, no contact info. Just another ghost in Sin City. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, I scoured nearby casinos, showing her picture to dealers and bartenders. Some recognized her. Others shrugged indifferently. Every lead seemed to end in a dead-end alley. Back home, Liam wasn't wasting time waiting for answers. While I chased shadows in Vegas, he became a detective in his own right. Using the laptop I'd left behind, he searched for anything related to Becky or Greg. Late one night, I received a text from him. "Dad, look at this." Attached was a screenshot of a social media post. Becky posing with Greg at a high-stakes poker tournament. In the caption, she wrote cryptically, "New beginnings." Reading those words filled me with equal parts rage and sadness. New beginnings? At what cost? At Liam's expense? Determined not to let her off the hook, I called Liam and praised his sleuthing skills. "You're amazing, buddy," I said. "Keep digging. We're going to find her together." Hearing his voice reminded me why I was doing this. Not just for justice, but for family. For us. After days of searching, I finally caught a break. A bartender at a dingy casino recognized Becky's photo and mentioned seeing her at a motel further down the road. My pulse raced as I drove there, half expecting to find nothing again. But when I knocked on room 14B, the door creaked open slightly. There she was, Becky, looking thinner and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes widened in shock, then flooded with tears. "Ethan," she choked out, stepping aside to let me in. The room smelled stale, littered with empty food wrappers and crumpled tissues. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands nervously. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." As Becky spilled her story, pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Greg had swept her off her feet months ago, spinning tales of easy money and luxurious lifestyles. He convinced her to raid Liam's college fund, promising they'd double or triple the amount through high-stakes gambling. Of course, it was all a lie. Once the money was gone, Greg disappeared too, leaving Becky stranded in Vegas with nothing but guilt and regret. Listening to her, I felt a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger surged at her recklessness, but pity tugged at me too. This wasn't the strong, independent woman I'd married. It was a shadow of her former self. "Do you realize what you've done?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "To Liam? To us." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I considered walking away, letting her deal with the mess she'd made. But deep down, I knew I couldn't abandon her completely. Not yet. When Liam joined me in Vegas 2 days later, I wasn't sure how Becky would react, or how he would handle seeing her after everything. But the moment they reunited, any doubts melted away. Becky threw her arms around him, sobbing apologies while Liam stood stiffly, unsure whether to hug her back or pull away. Finally, he spoke. "Why did you take the money, Mom?" His voice was calm, almost eerily mature for a 10-year-old. Becky hesitated, then admitted the truth about Greg and the scam. "I thought I was helping," she said weakly, "but I ruined everything instead." Liam didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at me, silently asking what came next. Together, we decided to fight back, to expose Greg and recover whatever we could of stolen funds. With Liam's help, we piecing together evidence against Greg. Using Becky's phone, we found texts and emails detailing his scheme. Armed with this information, we contacted local authorities, who agreed to investigate. Meanwhile, I tracked Greg's movements, discovering he frequented a seedy underground poker club downtown. The plan was risky. Confront Greg directly and record his confession. Becky volunteered to act as bait, luring him into a meeting under false pretenses. Though I hated putting her in harm's way, I couldn't deny her need for redemption. As we prepared for the showdown, Liam reminded us to stay safe. "We're a team," he said firmly, "no matter what happens." The confrontation took place in a dimly lit parking garage, far from prying eyes. Becky approached Greg cautiously, pretending to offer more money. Hidden nearby, Liam and I watched anxiously, recording every word. Greg's arrogance quickly turned to panic when Becky accused him of stealing from her son. "You think I care about your kid?" he sneered. "This is business." That's when the police arrived, surrounding him before he could escape. They arrested him on multiple charges, including fraud and extortion. Watching him being led away in handcuffs brought a mix of relief and vindication, but also exhaustion. The battle was over, but the scars remained. In the aftermath, Becky made the hardest decision of her life, turning herself in. Though only a fraction of the stolen money was recovered, she insisted on facing consequences for her actions. "I owe it to Liam," she told me tearfully, "and to myself." Saying goodbye to her outside the courthouse was bittersweet. Liam hugged her tightly, whispering, "I love you, Mom." Her eyes filled with tears as she kissed his forehead. Then she walked inside, disappearing once again, but this time willingly. On the drive home, Liam leaned his head against the window, lost in thought. "She'll be okay," I assured him. "We all will." Life after Vegas was quieter, though not without its challenges. Becky's decision to turn herself and left a void in Liam's life that neither of us could fully fill. He missed her deeply, but he also understood why she had to face the consequences of her actions. In many ways, it was a lesson in accountability, not just for Becky, but for all of us. I threw myself into rebuilding our lives, starting with Liam's college fund. It wasn't easy. We'd lost most of what we'd saved, and starting over felt daunting. But every small step forward gave me hope. I picked up extra freelance IT projects, cut back on unnecessary expenses, and even sold some old gadgets I no longer used. Slowly, the balance began to grow again. Watching those numbers climb reminded me of something important. Resilience isn't about bouncing back unscathed. It's about finding strength in the broken pieces. News of Becky's arrest spread through our community like wildfire. Some people sympathized with her situation, calling her a victim of manipulation and bad choices. Others were less forgiving, labeling her selfish and reckless. I tried to shield Liam from the gossip as much as possible, but kids hear things. One day, he came home from school visibly upset after overhearing classmates talking about his mom. "They said she's a thief," he muttered, tears welling up in his eyes. My heart ached for him, pulling him onto my lap. I held him close. "Your mom made a mistake, a big one, but she's not a bad person," I told him gently. "She loves you more than anything, and she's trying to make things right. That takes courage." He nodded, sniffling, and hugged me tighter. Moments like these reminded me how crucial it was to keep communication open between us. Honesty wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. Months later, Becky sent Liam a letter from prison. Her handwriting was shaky, the words raw and heartfelt. She apologized again, not just for stealing the money, but for letting him down as a mother. "I want you to know how proud I am of you," she wrote. "You're stronger than I ever was, and I hope someday you can forgive me." Liam read the letter several times before folding it carefully and tucking it into a drawer. When I asked if he wanted to write back, he hesitated. "Do you think she really means it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes, I do. And writing to her might help both of you heal." After much thought, Liam penned a response. His letter was simple yet profound. "I miss you, Mom. I love you too. Please take care of yourself." Reading it brought tears to my eyes. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but it was a start. As time passed, I found myself reflecting on my own role in everything that had happened. Had I been too trusting? Too complacent? Divorce had forced me to confront flaws in our marriage, especially Becky's struggles with impulsivity. But I realized now that I hadn't done enough to address them. Maybe if I had been more patient, more supportive, things would have turned out differently. Still, dwelling on what-ifs wouldn't change the past. Instead, I focused on becoming a better version of myself, for Liam's sake and mine. I reconnected with hobbies I neglected, like photography and hiking. On weekends, Liam and I explored nearby parks, capturing moments with my old camera. These outings became sacred rituals, opportunities to bond and create new memories. Each snapshot reminded me of how far we'd come and how much farther we'd go together. By the end of the year, life felt almost normal again. Not perfect, but manageable. Becky remained incarcerated, serving a reduced sentence thanks to her cooperation with authorities. Though visits were rare, Liam occasionally spoke to her on the phone, sharing updates about school and his latest robotics projects. Their conversations were brief but meaningful, proof that their connection endured despite everything. At home, Liam continued to thrive. His passion for building robots earned him second place in a statewide competition, a feat that filled me with immense pride. As we celebrated his achievement, I couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. This boy, who had faced betrayal, loss, and uncertainty, had emerged stronger and wiser than ever. "You're going to do great things," I told him as we toasted with sparkling cider. He grinned, his glasses slightly askew. "Thanks, Dad. We're doing them together." The following spring brought new beginnings. Liam's robotics team advanced to regionals, and I landed promotion at work, allowing us to boost his college savings even faster. Financial stability still felt fragile, but we were making progress, one step at a time. One evening, as we stargazed in the backyard, Liam turned to me with a curious expression. "Dad, do you think dreams can come true even when bad stuff happens?" I smiled, leaning back on the grass. "Absolutely. Sometimes the hardest things teach us the most about ourselves. They show us what we're capable of." He nodded thoughtfully, then pointed to a particularly bright star. "That one's MIT, he declared. "I'm going to get there someday." Hearing his unwavering determination warmed my heart. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, I knew he'd find a way to overcome them. Becky reached out again around Liam's 11th birthday, sending him a handmade card from prison. Inside was a short note. "Happy birthday, my brilliant boy. Never stop dreaming." Enclosed was a drawing of a robot, a clumsy but heartfelt attempt at recreating one of Liam's designs. Liam studied the card for a long time before placing it alongside the others Becky had sent. Though reconciliation seemed unlikely anytime soon, there was a sense of closure in knowing she cared. For my part, I chose to focus on gratitude, for Liam's strength, for Becky's efforts to make amends, and for the lessons we learned along the way. Life may have thrown us curveballs, but we caught them and kept moving forward. Our story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but maybe that's okay. Real life rarely does. What matters is how we rise after falling, how we rebuild after breaking, and how we hold on to hope even in the darkest moments. On a crisp autumn night, Liam and I sat on the porch, sipping hot chocolate and watching leaves swirl in the wind. "Dad," he said suddenly, "do you think Mom will be okay?" I set my mug down and looked at him. "I think she will," I replied honestly. "She's learning just like we are." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Later, as I tucked him into bed, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, we've got each other. That's what matters most." He smiled sleepily, murmuring, "Yeah, we do." And with that, the chapter closed, not perfectly, but with promise. Together, we'd weathered storms and emerged stronger. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. We'd face it side by side.